Hina, over to you.
Right. Can you all see my screen? Okay, great. I want this to be a quite interactive session, so you can jump in, just raise your hand, because I think that's quite important. I don't want a death by PowerPoint situation here. A lot of sort of sharing, knowledge sharing, as well as questions you might have as I'm going through. Now, the example that I'm going to go through was particularly looking at direct payments. However, we have compared managed service and packages as well. And sometimes we have found that one of the key problems is that we see when we think about social care and commissioning, we see it as a cost, not as an investment. And that's the key thing. It's really reframing that mind of this is actually an investment and you need to be thinking about your ROIs. So we already know the situation at the moment where there are pressures within the system. We have legal requirements and the Procurement Act as well, where we have to show social value. We have to show that there's a diversity of providers as well and procurement. And we also want to ensure that outcomes are better and that we are considering prevention as well as part of our commissioning. So we actually how can we make our money go further, right? We can't solve everything, but how can we make our budgets go further? Now, I worked with the Treasury and with various various government departments over the years using the Green Book. The Green Book is basically ways in which the government makes policy investments and large investment decisions. And they do it in a really holistic way. So this is no hocus pocus. This is actually what government and the Treasury uses. So it's based in foundations that are extremely strong. Now, the first thing that we do is we see, again, as I said, it's not a cost, it's an investment when we're thinking about commissioning. We look at the net present value of, which is really important over 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, the whole life cycle of the investment or the cost as we call it, but we should be calling it investment. We look at the well-being of the individual and of the care staff, the front care staff, as well as the local authority as well, in terms of there must be a positive feedback on you as well in terms of well-being. Then we look at the economic impacts. Now, they're quite important, the economic environmental benefits, because that's part of the Social Care Act, which is part of the Procurement Act. And then the distribution analysis, which is the impact on inequalities. Are we commissioning pieces of work that are only catering for a certain group of individuals? Are we ensuring that there is some kind of equity and equality in what we're procuring? So this is what the Treasury looks at, and this is the framework that we are now using for commissioning. So I've got an example. We were supposed to do some clarifications, but it's really good to get a concrete example in front of you. So you understand how it works, because it might all seem, well, yeah, okay, that sounds really great, but how do I apply this in reality? Now, this is an example where this is a direct payment, so therefore the cost is lower compared to managed care, which could be a corporate provider. It could be a private equity provider. It is a private provider. Now, not all private providers are the same, because we also have community private providers who do an amazing job. And we've actually done some work where we've compared a community provider that's private with a more of a corporate provider. And the community provider was more expensive on paper, but the evidence was that the cost avoidance to the local authority in terms of safeguarding, cost avoidance, prevention, and the NHS were outweighed the cost. So you have to see this as an investment. Now, here we can see that, yes, you get the financial benefits, but that's not what you should be looking at. You should not be looking at that. You should be looking at the outcomes over the years, thinking of it as an investment. So this one is where we really bring all of the SROI and monetize together. Okay. So we know here that we have saved money, but you don't really need to concentrate on that as much. When we look at the avoided cost in terms of placement breakdowns. All of this information comes from electronic care plans as well. So it's not difficult to find this data and to collect this data. So here we see that in community-led care in the first year, there may still be some placement breakdowns, but they're reduced vastly. That the safeguarding, again, the cost for that has fallen drastically because we've got the before and we've got the after. You can see the impact on the NHS as well, and the mental health services and GP visits and so on and so forth. Sorry, David, do you want to come in?
I was just going to ask, what does placement breakdown mean?
This is when there is a crisis, and the placement isn't the appropriate the provider is not the appropriate service, and so we have to then move to another service.
The cost of switching,
Yeah,
effectively.
the cost of switching, basically. Yeah, the cost of switching. So we now can see that the just looking at, and this is all the information we get from the electorate care plan, what the actual costs are associated, the cost avoidance, both to the NHS and to the local authority. So that's quite critical. And this is something that we've used for community care and, as I said, for commissioning packages. And what it does is it allows you to think about this as an investment that will provide you the ROIs that's required by looking at the outcomes. So it's directing decision makers as to what is the best option for the individual within the budget. And we saw here that with managed care, Sarah had different staff every day. She liked swimming, but there wasn't a choice on the time. It was all based around the carers' rota. She was rushed, her routine was rushed. So again, it was a lot of clock watching. And her mum had to provide a lot of unpaid care, which raised her anxiety, the mothers as well, and GP visits. And then when we moved to community care, she could choose, because this was direct payment, she could choose who she worked with. It was flexible and person-centered because it was community care. They could say, okay, today you're not feeling very well in the morning. Do you think we should do the activity in the afternoon instead? And the swimming was, she had swimming lessons when it was more in quieter times. Her mum could go back to part-time work. And all over, in terms of mum and the family and Sarah, there was reduction in anxiety and crises. So when we look at this, what we can calculate is the each pound that you spend, what do you get back? So for £1 that was spent on this commissioning, £2.61 was retrieved by spending on this particular service, and that's just the financial BS benefit cost ratio. So that does include all the cost avoidance, the prevention, and so on and so forth. It's not just the savings on the fees, okay? And then if we look at the SROI, where we consider the well-being, the impact on the economy, that ROI rises to 3.75, which means each pound you spend on this service, you get £4 back. The local authority or the commissioner gets £4 back. And that's quite powerful. Again, this is using all of the Treasury framework. This is what government uses for every decision it makes, investment decision it makes, and policy reform. They do this analysis. So here we can see what exactly are we saving on. So in terms of direct, because this was the direct savings, which was the 23 grand a year that we were saving just by moving, but actually it's only 39 pence in terms of the ROI. That's a holistic 3.75. So £4 back for £1 you spend, 39p is attributable just to the change in the service because it's cheaper. Okay. The system savings, that is the NHS and the LA avoided cost, is 33p. And the impact on from the economy is £1.89, £2. And the well-being is £1, right? So what we're saying is that you don't just look at the cost reduction, you must look at the system savings, the impact on the local economy, which is part of the Procurement Act, and also the impact on well-being. Well-being is very important because what it does is it reduces anxiety, isolation, confidence, so that individual then can be part of the community, part of society, and have their own voice. So it's a very important element to include. Um, and this is why this is sort of really breaking it down that when we looked, and this is what we did here is we suggested surveys that were really short. They were non-verbal surveys, so they were very accessible, very short, asking how that individual or Sarah felt before the service and after the service. Very simple questions every quarter. And we, from that, and again, using the Green Book, using the Treasury Book, we could monetize those positive impacts on her well-being. So if she said, questions like, do you sleep better at night than before? Um, do you feel anxious? And she said, well, I used to feel anxious before my carer would come in, because I knew everything would be rushed and I wasn't sure what carer I would have. And that made me very anxious. It made me quite frustrated. It made me really upset. How do you feel now? And she did this with emojis as well. We made sure that it was very accessible for her. And I think actually, even if we even have found that there are carers who actually have conditions, so those forms or shouldn't be forms, they should be accessible non-verbal forms. And what we found is that how she felt now, that I'm excited, I look forward, I feel I will have consistent care. It's not the word she used, but she felt there was stability. So with that, we were able to monetize her well-being. And then the local economy impact was that this was being provided by the local community, which meant that there were new jobs. And those new jobs were flexible. They also worked around the person, which and again there was a multiplier effect because when they have jobs, then they buy things within the local economy. So the local shop is used more, the theatre is used more, and this again is using the ONS approach, a government approach, where we're looking at the impact of new jobs and the impact of training investments as well. And this is part of the Procurement Act. This is something that needs to be evidenced. And it's not that hard to evidence because we have that information. So with the 50 packages we analysed, we found that the annual savings were 1.15 million. There was 150 new jobs. The crisis cost prevention was nearly 1 million. And when we look at that from a 5-year perspective, we're looking at a 5 million saving. Now, this is what I think is really important, that if we start moving from the language or the mindset of cost but investment, then we can do things in a better way that is more efficient, where our money will go longer. And there are cases where there's gradual fading support, which we've also seen, where there's been a transition from isolated care to community-led care. The isolated care for the NHS cost over £1 million. When it went into community care, it was reduced to about 450 a year. However, the local authority could not take that level of cost immediately. So what the NHS did is said, we will provide you with funding over a number of years. So we brought those stakeholders together. So there was a contribution from the NHS or the ICB so that they could provide that funding that was manageable by the local authority, because this individual was a young individual. And we knew that over time that the care from 4:1 would be reduced to 2:1. But that between that time of that transition, that we needed that bridge of funding. And we really believe that community-led care, though expensive compared to other care, would provide that individual with that level of quality of life. And then that would be affordable for the local authority. So really understanding the stakeholders and really understanding the individual. Why community support creates value. When we do look at managed care, and I am thinking about private equity here, particularly in corporate care, the costs are rising. I mean, in children's services, it's risen by about 80%, particularly in private equity. And there are words like, well, we've got their head over the barrel. Um, their overheads are higher, the profit leaves the community. There's minimum wage workers. It doesn't go to the frontline staff. They do have a high staff turnover that has an impact on the person. Um, and it does create that dependency and weakens communities, weakens people, weakens society. Whereas when we move to community-led care, we see there's a very different story there. We are creating that independence, that resilience, and it is something that, West Streeting has talked about. We need to bring back care to the community. Um, and, direct payments and ISFs facilitate that. And then that's why they're a very good enabler of moving from managed care to community-led care. And we have seen cases where it's incredibly complex care, but it has now moved to community-led care because that person and their family can choose what activities they do, when they do it, who they want to spend time with, and have that level of consistency. They have that agency back, and their voice is amplified, and the outcomes are better, and the costs are also more efficient. So what do we need to be able to move from managed care to community care? Well, identify high cost packages, 10 to 20. I think you should think about a 5-year perspective, not just look at it from an annual perspective. I think that's what local authorities really should consider in terms of budgeting. Build this SRI evidence. You do get a lot of this data from the digital care plans, and the finance team should be involved. It should be part of our decision making. We have to make sure that we have the community assets as well. So, before we think about moving to community, do we actually have those assets? If we don't have those assets, we need facilitators to create those assets that are sustaining, and then create the PAs and the digital infrastructure as well. A lot of the work that Chris Watson does in terms of really being able to make the infrastructure strong so that we can actually move to community care that's sustainable, that's strong, that's scalable, and that grows. And every region will grow in a different way, in a different service. But it's very important that we think about that infrastructure and that sort of plumbing aspect of it before we move to community care. The Procurement Act is one very important part where I think that when we use SROIs, we can really show that social value. As I said, the environmental aspect, the local economy aspect, there is more transparency, there is more power given back, and market shaping, which is part of the CARE Act as well. And there is that element of prevention. If we are allowing individuals to choose the services they need, they will then have that resiliency, that opportunity to become independent, confident. And at the moment, we are seeing lots of pressures, and we are seeing, particularly post-COVID, a situation where young people are facing a lot of mental health issues, which has become quite invisible, very unpaid, very much fallen into the voluntary sector. And this is a really good opportunity for us to really take those services and young people to provide them what they need when they need it. And that's where the prevention lies for across the social care sector. So what I wanted to, just sort of summarize that, we either continue the way we are, where we will see a negative ROI. We do accept, annual rises and declining outcomes and the risk of legal challenges, and enrich shareholders, or we transform and we start thinking about building communities, and transforming lives and looking at it from an investment point of view, what that ROI is for the commissioner. And as I said, this is not about cost, because when we previously looked at, and I think this is a quite important element, which is that yes, the direct payments were cheaper, but it's the gains were in the system savings, the local economy, and the well-being. So there may be times where this direct savings, when we're looking at the financial, may be negative, but everything on the other side is positive and outweighs it. So this isn't by just looking at cheaper costs. We will need to look at the outcomes and we need to monetize those. And they are important because they're system savings. So I think that moving that framework from cost to investment is critical. And now I think that it would be quite good to get your reflections, and perhaps to start our Q&A. Any questions? Any reflections? Have you, have you used what are your evaluation tools that you do use for commissioning? None?
Hina, it's David here. I'll chime in to help us get going. I mean, I think my observation is I don't think anybody is looking at it like this.
No.
It tends to, in my experience, it tends to be that short-term focus on that initial saving of moving to a direct payment, so the 39p in the pound or whatever it was, and then a genuine belief in all of the other benefits, but absolutely no way of being able to even describe them in the way that you've done so, let alone to actually quantify them. I think people tend to just get lost in the and understandably so, in the principle of, well, it's choice and it's control, and therefore it has to be better. But I think what you're doing here is then saying, well, yes, it's better for that individual, but it's also better for wider society, and this is the reasons why, and this is then how we might start to quantify it. And yeah, I don't think anybody else is looking at it like this at all.
What's really interesting is that we're talking to commissioners now, and they have realized that that they need to quantify those impacts. Some have actually said, and I'll be really open here. Well, the well-being, okay, that's great. That's a nice to have. But we really want to understand the prevention and the cost avoidance, which you didn't think about previously. So it's not about, as you said, moving to a cheaper service. It's really understanding that prevention and cost avoidance and the impact on the local economy as well. So we actually now are talking to commissioners who are thinking about this and are commissioning pieces of work. And I think it's because there's that push now to community-led care. And to more digitalization, which will allow us to collect those impacts, because a lot of these impacts come from the electronic care plans, as well as the surveys, which are the nice to haves. But we are seeing a change, aren't we, Paul? From that perspective, it's been quite.
Yeah, I mean, if I just come in briefly a minute, then David, absolutely. That's one of the big changes here is, we talk, there's the House of Commons report that recently talked about £1 equals £1.75, I think, and then there's the Skills for Care one, which again was sort of £1 equals to £3. All that's great, but actually what really matters is what does it mean for each individual area of the public sector? And that's one of the big things that we're trying to bring through here is you can break that down into its components and actually make it truly comparable. And I think and embrace the fact that we do measure things in financial terms, that monetization is not a negative term, but is actually fundamental to how we allocate resources. So much of the sector we run away from it and we think, and then we end up focusing only on cost rather than allowing our stories that are fantastic to be translated into something that actually means material financial well-being. And I think that's for me one of the big insights that Heen is bringing, and he and is also is prevalent elsewhere in government. They use this approach across a whole range of investment decisions, and yet we don't do it systematically within our sector effectively at all, as David was pointing out earlier. We are faced with a significant liability on the other side. And let's think about it in those terms, in terms of the amount of support that's needed in this sector to help some of these individuals. That is a liability. We should be investing in that systematically to get better outcomes. And using the language of longer term investment, particularly in the area of learning disabilities and autism, I think is crucial. And Hina, does that make sense? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, this is based on the government framework. This is what the Treasury uses. So, if now commissioners use this, they have that solid framework to then be able to optimize decisions and to even say that actually we're going to start seeing positive feedbacks in year 2. We'll break even in year 1. But then as we look at year 2, 3, 4, and 5, the benefits increase, those monetized benefits increase because that individual now has become independent. Actually, there are very, very clear examples where individuals have been close to suicidal, had that support, the right kind of support, and then have been able to move into a place where they still have part of that support, but they can start working again and have relationships again. And if they didn't have that support initially, then they wouldn't have been able to be in that position. So we need to think about it's an investment. It's an investment in society, community, but you also have that steel financial head where you say there are some investments we cannot do, but there are some investments that we should seriously consider to ensure that we're optimizing and allocating our resources appropriately. And this is what government does. Government has finite amount of funding, and it chooses which policies are going to bring the most impact, not just financial impacts, because we saw here, and this is all from the Treasury. Sorry, I'm probably giving you. This is all from the Treasury book. They look at the financial aspect. They're quite disciplined at looking at the discount rate, which is, we're discounting this investment by 3.5% over the cycle of this investment. But we're also considering that when we make an investment, it should have an impact on well-being. What kind of impact does it have? A really good example is when I was an independent government advisor at the Department of Transport. And they wanted to put in a roundabout near a school, and they thought about the impact on the children and the parents and the danger, but also the well-being. So even when they do infrastructure planning, they think about all of those elements, the environmental element, the fact that they're having a bus route in an area which is more deprived, which is allowing it to come into areas where there are more jobs, and so on and so forth. So this kind of framework is used by government for decision making. Claire, you've got your hand up.
Yeah,
and I'll come to you, Gareth. Yeah,
I've got a couple of questions actually. So obviously we're here talking about ISFs or focusing on that more, but how does this translate to, and have you done similar calculations for like adult social care and the use of direct payments so that people can self-direct their own support?
Yeah, we are doing work on direct payments. We've been doing work on managed payments, direct payments, ISFs, because we're working with micro providers as well. And most of obviously that work is on the direct payment side of things, and the impacts in terms of on the community outcomes and the individual outcome, on the cost and so on and so forth, have been very, very positive. So a lot of our work is on the direct payment side because we are now working with the community aspect and the voluntary sector as well. So yeah, we are seeing some very positive impacts. And then what we do in some cases is we provide a form when it is a micro provider to get into the discipline of having those forms that I was talking about that are non-verbal forms, because I think it's important that providers understand how they're doing as well, and to provide that feedback again to the commissioners. So yeah, we're doing quite a lot of work on that, but we also have done some work on some managed commissioning as well.
And are the numbers similar, like
Yes.
in terms of the return on investment?
Yes, there are. In some areas they're higher, but they generally tend to be above one when you compare it to. Because one of the key things about this framework is that you compare it to something. You have to have a benchmark. For instance, if I say I'm better than Ash, right? No, if I say I'm better, I'm just better. I'm really good at tennis, but you'll be like, well, compared to who? And I'd say, well, compared to Ash. Then it makes sense. By the way, I haven't played tennis with you, and you're probably way better at tennis than I am. But I'm just saying, what you need to do is you need to compare it. Whereas if I say, compared to Paul, I'm not very good at tennis because I have to compare to something. So that's the key thing, that what we tend to do when we look at, and I suspect this is what Skills for Care and the other organisations have done, is they say a £1 spent here, you get 1.7, nearly £2 back, right? But they're not comparing it to another service. So that's the key thing. You need to say, well, there could be two options where you have a managed care that's community care, managed commissioned, and then you have one community care, and then you want to compare those two. So you have to have something that you compare to. That's the key thing.
And then I guess my second question was like the data that you've been presenting today is obviously really persuasive and powerful. So what's your plan to share this more widely so that everyone can hear about the return on investment for community-led care?
So I actually have written a report which I've been really transparent, because one of the things, we're a social enterprise. Whatever we do has to have a positive impact on society. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing now. I've got an investment banking background. I'm here because I want to be, right? So what we're doing is I'm writing a report which I'm going to put on the website, which you will be able to download free. But what we're also doing is that we're working with our I'd like to say partners, because I don't really see them as clients, our partners, and we are going to write a white paper that we're going to take to Parliament of what good looks like and why community care is important aspect of the solution. Because if we don't do that, they won't really get it, right? So we're going to make sure the right politicians are in the room, the right influencers are in the room, so that we will be able to progress this further. So we're knowledge sharing with those we can, and then we're also making sure that we take it at that level as well. So if you do want to work with us, it would be really great, because we can then start collecting more stories as well, and more case studies to strengthen our case.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Sorry. Gary, sorry, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, I've just been reading through your appraisal. It was interesting, and I appreciate we're talking about SDS. So a couple of things just to make some points, and probably I don't want this to sound, I suppose, in a sense, gently putting a bit of rub. As you know, Treasury orthodoxy, there is that milieu. We work with politicians, probably some of us working quite rapidly in a changing political environment, where Treasury orthodoxy perhaps won't land. I appreciate the pullback to me is this is about evidence, get that, so don't, absolutely. Yeah. But there is that reality as well. We work in a highly politically charged environment, I think now. where, you know, the issues about Treasury methodology, you know, you can listen to Radio 4, take your pick, or, you know, where that's been questioned about, is it sufficiently picking up? So the example you put on your thing is really interesting. So it said a social care supported living provider was put their cost and it's higher than the commission provider rate, and you put a justification for it. But ultimately, sorry, I am going to sound like the Treasury here, the
Yeah.
orthodoxy will be, the bottom line is, we can't afford it. Now, that might be a political choice, but that's what's driving some behaviour. So I'm just putting it there, not in a gentle way. Don't see it as me being, so please don't pile on me and say, oh, you know, I'm absolutely clear about evidence, but I'm just reflecting on, as a commissioner, you know, we are, as you know, the University of Birmingham talks about this, we are in that space between, you know, using evidence, but also very much the political space about choices with competed limited resources as well. So yeah, it's just that there. So just to maybe, you know, put that in there. Thanks.
No, I think I'm really glad you raised that, because I think that it's really important to have that diversity of voice where you do get pushback. I think that's very, very important. The thing is, it's evidence led, but it's not evidence led. It's independent, right? So what we're saying, and this has happened where we've where the local authority did not have the funding for a particular care package, right? And then we tried to think about solutions around that, because that individual needed that package. So what do you do? So with that's when we said that there has to be some gradual fading support between the ICB and the local authority. So I think there is something there where we need to work on and strengthen as time goes on. And I think when we are talking about community-led care, we will have to address that quite drastically, because the local authority has a certain amount of budget. And what they want to do is, when they do take on packages, they have to make sure that they are affordable and sustainable going forward. So in those situations, there can be negotiation between the ICB and the local authority. But there are times when the local authority has to realize that a cheaper option will end up becoming more expensive, and to just go in there with your eyes open. I think that's the key thing, that what we're trying to do, really trying to show, that this package is not going to be stable because it's had failed services and so on and so forth. So just to make sure that, you know, that there might be costs incurred later that might be worse, and a reputational damage as well.
I think absolutely correct. And just to respond back, you're absolutely correct. And and even, you know, we'd need to do that absolutely eyes wide open. I think the reason I'm putting that caution is, I'm just saying there is that, I'm going to use hostile environment, but there is that critical environment, perhaps a better word, coming in around what's deemed to be Treasury orthodoxy, particularly when we get that rapid change. Anyway, I see Paul's wanting to come in, so.
Paul, can I just get this 1 second, please? This isn't actually Treasury or orthodoxy, just to make it clear, right? So that's political, right? So this framework is actually a framework that
I get what you're saying.
Yeah. So we've just got to disengage between the politics and the evidence, I guess.
I'm just saying, you'll hear from colleagues that can be a challenging perspective. You know, we, as local authority, we deal directly with local politicians. That's who we're accountable to. So there is that. But anyway, you know, it's not me. Believe me, I'm not on the side of let's, you know, deal with evidence. It's just some of the reflective points about what's coming and what's happening really around some of these points.
No, absolutely. Sorry, Chris.
No, just, I mean, I guess I very diplomatically, Gary, we're talking about like a post-truth society that we live in, isn't it? Where we don't focus on logic or data models anymore. We focus on just what people think and what social media propagates.
It's an interesting journey. Let's put it that way. And that's me probably using the kind of misquoted, apparently, I understand, translation of it. But that's where we're at. And and I'm sure other colleagues, that's probably more in different areas, more that's happened more rapidly, more recently. But anyway.
and I think, like, for me here, it's probably it's the tangibles, isn't it? It's the sort of finding the tangibles that you can show people that they can understand it, because there's
it's just
difficult thing is
interesting
just the
because I know
complexity, isn't it?
Derbyshire, they've set up, I don't work in Derbyshire, but there's, like, where councils have shifted and you've got these Doge kind of things going on. It's just, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, difficult times for you guys, definitely.
Very difficult. I really do feel that it is a difficult time. It's horrible, isn't it? I mean, anyway. Mark, you've got your hand up, and I think, Karen, you have to.
Yeah, I was just going to make a little bit of an observation. I think the interesting slant for me on this is about the potential it's got to unlock greater partnership working or integration with health. Because I think first and foremost, I think prevention and cost avoidance is great, but every time I've sat down with anybody from finance, with 40% funding from government has evaporated since 2010. So I think the hook into this is you do need that very obvious, it costs less for this particular package of care. I think the longer term benefit is by being able to then understand the wider system benefits. And therefore enter into conversations with health partners.
Yeah.
The old cliche about there's more slips and trips in the winter. Well, if health gave some money to local authorities to grit the roads a bit more effectively, then there'd be less people rocking up at A&E, therefore less pressure on NHS. A very simplified sort of myth, really. But I think it's that kind of debate you can get into, which is the local authority saves up front because they've got a package of care, but the work can be done to demonstrate that that isn't just the main saving. There's a system-wide saving that then can perhaps develop a bit more of joint working and funding or cross funding in a broader sense for health and social care.
Absolutely, and actually even across the local authority, because we did see that as well with one of our projects where social care then was able to talk to the transport department when it came to recruitment and retention, that we actually need more transport coming in so that we have a stable workforce in certain areas where it's rural and people can't come in and out, and therefore there's a problem. So there was even across government, I think, across local authority, we should be able to break those silos, as well as talking to our health partners, which we should be doing. And that's what the ICB's job was to do. It was community care. Karen?
Yeah, just a really quick one. And Hina, I find this really, really interesting, as you know. And I guess I wanted to say to Gary, as a provider of preventative support, very much community-led, I totally agree that money is limited and there are all sorts of problems in these conversations, but we both sit each side of the table and we have conversations all around the country with all our various councils. And, sometimes it feels very inadequate that we're having a debate that's not built any substance. And so I suppose it would be great if we use this sort of methodology, because I think we'd have a better conversation from both sides of understanding where we're at and what we need to do, and looking at it in the broadest landscape. And certainly for us at Keyring, you're providing social care support, preventative support, but actually we're liaising with the police, with mental health services, with the town centre manager for somebody that's having particular issues. It'd be housing. There's so many elements in just living a life. And it would help, I think, all of us have a better understanding. And I think I look forward to the day when we have, commissioning conversations built on facts that commissioners can make the right decisions for their communities on, and we know what to offer as well. So I suppose for me, I'm a big fan because I think we need to get there.
And there is a movement. There is a movement with commissioners. I've spoken to quite a few commissioners, both at the NHS and local authorities, who are now wanting to monetize those impacts. They are thinking about prevention. They are thinking about community-led care, and the impact that has. Because what it does, it reduces down those system costs. And you can see it, how that will be reduced over the years as well. So I think that we just need to have that way of thinking as almost like a business would. What's rational here? It's almost like when we think about commissioning in social care, that it's just a cost. It's just a burden. But really, we should be thinking this is an investment, and what can we get for our investment over the years, from year 1 to year 10. And a lot of these individuals are going to be within our system, maybe all their life. So we need to plan that. We know they're not going to go away, right? So why is it that we don't think we already know what the demographics are within that community? We already know all the information about our community. We can predict the level of pressure that there will be within the system. It always surprises me that the NHS is really surprised that it's winter. And that it's going to have pressure around the winter time. Why can't they plan for it? That's what I mean. It's bizarre that we do that. It's illogical, and I think things are going to change. Paul.
Just one really quick thing related to that, and I think for the likes of Gary and Mark, I suppose it's just trying to see whether you can talk about things over multi-years, and just actually think about things as that liabilities and investments, rather than really trying to meet finance on their own terms, to try and recognize that you're managing outcomes over time. That's all.
I know that there are pressures on you because, it's all about the bottom line, and the pressures that you probably face, as a team internally, as a local authority, must be huge, right? It's just, if we can think about that prevention and that cost of prevention, it would liberalize more budgets. It really would. And the reason why I use the Treasury framework is because you can argue with them. This could be put in a court of law. It's that powerful. This is what they use. You're throwing it back in their face. You're saying, this is what we need for our budget. This is the prevention that we're doing as a local authority. This is what we're doing in terms of increasing our community assets. We are working with not-for-profits. And this is another thing that I think that we found with our work, that there are so many fantastic providers that are not-for-profit, that are voluntary sector, and they're not part of the commissioning process. And they should be seen as partners rather than customers or clients. They are really partners because they are part of the prevention story. And that is, again, something that needs reframing and exploring. Christopher.
Thank you, Nina. Yeah, I just wanted to add that in Enfield we have our prevention early intervention services. So this is roughly 1.5 million investment in our community voluntary sector each year to deliver things like home from hospital for people without Care Act needs, support for unpaid carers, information and advice. And one of those providers actually tracks their social return on investment. And I think they came up with about £14 reinvested in terms of social benefits, which is fantastic and something we want to look at rolling out across those providers, because I do feel in terms of the financial climate going forwards, we have to be really kind of clear on benefits realisation, where we are spending public money and the value that we are achieving for that. In terms of our care purchasing, there's pockets of this happening. So we have a kind of enhanced transition project looking at children and young people in residential settings outside of our borough, far away from home, restrictive care practices. And we did a bit of a invest to save 200,000 on staffing, and we're looking at the kind of outcomes of those young people as we move them back in borough with their own tenancy in their own home, with their own carers, doing their own things and learning new skills. But I think we need to get better at being more kind of academic in terms of how we track and benchmark those costs. One thing I wanted to mention to everyone, and it's something I'm starting to look at, is the unit cost for health and social care, which is provided by the University of Kent. which is quite a useful tool. And I'm also aware that there was a named social worker project which looked at a bit of a cost benefit analysis, which has been promoted by SIPFA recently, just evidencing that allocation of a social worker from age 14 and the system benefits as well as the outcomes for the individual. So agree, it's something that needs to happen, but I think it's trying to find a systematic way of applying it is the challenge. Thank you.
I think that's really great. Thanks, Christopher. That's exactly what we need. We need to systemize this. And in terms of unit costs, there are some costs that aren't available, so we do desk research because we really want to understand what those cost avoidance are, and talking to people and finding out what the real costs are accrued so that we get a sense of prevention as well. Another good data source is the NHS schedule data. They've got vast amount of data and they've got a really nice dashboard as well. So that's a good use of resource as well to put in there. Katie.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to come in quickly. I'm really conscious of time, but firstly, thank you for that PowerPoint. I think I really learned a lot from that. It was really helpful, so thank you for that. I think we are kind of loosely doing some of these things in Brighton, but more as a kind of knee-jerk reaction to families having huge surpluses in their direct payments accounts and, not being able to spend them and being worried about the summer holidays. Is a huge time for children and young people to be, finding activities that are suitable or accessible. But we're definitely seeing more kind of anecdotal evidence of families less at risk of going into crisis, because we're finding that we've almost got a bit of an informal sort of community board of activities in the city that are fantastic and inclusive, and families could spend their direct payments on them. But I really think we need to kind of do that investment from the start and start factoring that into our process, because otherwise we just see those families who, may be going into crisis, they come back to a panel and they request more direct payments, and that just feels kind of almost sort of backwards in terms of they can't spend their direct payments, they go into crisis, they come back for more direct payments, and there's not another option that's considered. So I think that was really helpful to kind of look at that point of commissioning the package from the start rather than waiting till a surplus gets built up. But yeah, no, thank you for that. Really conscious of time.
Thank you very much, Katie, for that. That was really helpful.